Thank you, Doug. That was excellent information and really set the stage from a state perspective on how we're trying to position for economic development opportunities. And this really gives us a chance to kind of drop down a little bit on the region and how Northeast Florida can play a critical role in that and continuing to expand our opportunities. I want to thank David Sillick again with the Business Journal. This is 8 years of a partnership in terms of this effort. The attendance today suggests that we're still a topic of interest, and I think that it's just really a reflection of how the region comes together in looking at advancing issues around here. I do quickly want to acknowledge several TPO board members, and I'm real pleased to see Bob Spohr with Jacksport Board is here as part of our board. Terry Devlantes from the Jacksonville Aviation Authority is here and representing. Commissioner Doug Conkey in the back there with Clay County. Nancy Sykes-Klein, who was introduced earlier with the City of St. Augustine. Mike Borno, Mayor of Atlantic Beach. Danny Leeper, Commissioner in Nassau County, and Diane Hutchings, a commissioner in Clay County. So we're real pleased to have several of our board members in attendance today. We're real happy to be able to put on this transportation panel discussion with you again today, and we have some experts here in several areas. But what we want to do is kind of let today serve as an update on where we're at as a region, particularly as it relates to 2 new initiatives that we have moving in the area. As a community, we are really positioned to grab the logistics and freight opportunities in the area. Jacksport is a gem, an opportunity for us to move forward. When we look at our highway and our port facilities and our rail facilities and our aviation opportunities here in Northeast Florida, there's a tremendous opportunity to expand that. But it doesn't come without its challenges. We know the challenge of the harbor deepening, the challenges of continued population growth, commuting times expanding, and the reduction of funding that's available at this point at the federal level, and the challenges that the state continues to have. So when we look at it, we need to work regionally. There's more and more emphasis placed on regions to move forward, and we really want to touch that today. This really harkens back actually to 2 years ago. If you had been in attendance at this particular event, and it was actually just a few months into Secretary Prasad's role as the DOT Secretary, he challenged this community to think regionally. He challenged us to work collaboratively and try to move forward the issues of transportation in the region. And we hope today we're here to kind of introduce a couple of those initiatives and get his perspective on where we are moving forward. I do want to introduce them. I know that Ananth likes very, very brief introductions, and I think I will do that with all 3 in light of the time so we can get back on schedule and make sure that we keep this issue moving. To my immediate left, we have Daniel Davis, and he is the CEO and president of the Chamber, and he's also our state representative for District 15, and I'll leave it at that. Secretary Prasad was hired as the DOT Secretary in April of 2011, so a little over 2 years now, and obviously 22 years of experience in transportation. And to his immediate left is Bob Rhodes. He's former Executive VP for the St. Joe Company. Bob has served on various initiatives throughout the region, and particularly in Jacksonville. Bob sits here today as a member of the Regional Transportation Study Commission, and he chaired the Governance and Funding Committee, so we'll offer some perspective there. 2 key initiatives that have been happening in this region are the creation of the Northeast Florida Regional Transportation Commission, most recently passed in Tallahassee, as well as the establishment of the North Florida Business Alliance for Advancing Transportation. This is an effort that we have moved forward as a region as we see as part of the solution to help solve some of our own issues to supplement that's happening at the state and federal level. We want to create this as an open forum, so we're going to go ahead and go through a couple of questions for each of the panelists, but if there is a mic or if there's opportunity for anyone during this session that has questions, we want to go ahead and do that so we don't keep everything at the end and maybe not get to your points. With that, we'll set the stage actually with Secretary Prasad. Over 2 years now into your role, you've seen what's going on in the state, you've seen what's going on in Northeast Florida, and at least the initial state set up for these 2 initiatives that we're talking about. Given your perspective now, what's your opinion in Northeast Florida and how we're moving along in transportation and how we might continue to move that issue?
Well, just give me a softball question to begin with, right?
Yep.
Well, thank you, Jeff. No, I think we're making progress here in Northeast Florida, but we're not there yet. I think there's a lot of talk, and I know Bob's going to talk about this Northeast Florida Regional Transportation Commission. But at the end of the day, we got to come with a vision. And I tell this, and I've been to various regions in the state and talk about communities got to come together with the vision. What that region's going to look like. It has to include infrastructure. It's got to include quality of life issue. Transit's a big discussion. And all of those, at the end of the day, once you develop the vision, it also comes back down to how we're going to pay for it. And that's always the tough question. I look to Orlando. If you look at Orange County, Osceola, Seminole, and what they've done is they created a plan and how shall we grow. As a result of that, they've made investments not only in infrastructure but also transit. And, a lot of exciting things happening in Central Florida. Obviously, it took many years to get there. The same thing can happen here, but we all need to talk from the same sheet of music. There doesn't seem to be, federal government shut down. State of Florida is open for business. We're still here. Our economy is in good shape, but we need all local governments, local authorities, local counties, all to be talking from the same sheet of music, rather than everybody has a vision, but nobody wants to put their skin in the game. Everybody's looking for somebody else, for the Santa Claus to come, and well, you can get gifts, but it doesn't come with any cash. And federal government is going to only do so much. States going to do only so much, and I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see federal government actually doing less and less, and states actually picking up more of the burden, and in turn, you're gonna look at the local governments also starting to pick up. You got some great projects here. Doug talked about the Jacksport, and it's really Jackson. There's really no reason why. I'm a Gator, and there's no reason why Florida should lose to Georgia in anything. We got a game coming up, but there should be no reason why we should be losing to Savannah. Have you driven around Atlanta lately? And Atlanta is the intermodal logistics center for Savannah. It's gridlock city. And Georgians went to tax themselves a penny to put in infrastructure. Thank God it failed miserably. That's great news for Florida, because guess what? Florida's infrastructure is best in the country by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So we have the backbone, and what we've got to do is continue to build upon it, put the foot on the pedal, and you, as a region in Northeast Florida, Nassau County, Duval, St. John's, Clay, Baker, this is the center. Great access to interstate, great access by rail, and you got a port here. Clear shot of Suez Canal and Panama Canal. So it's now's the time to quit talking and worrying about and put words to action.
Bob, we'll go with you on that. Let's talk about we hear Nanth mention single vision and coming together with a single voice. And you've had now over 2 years of participation in the Regional Transportation Study Commission, recognizing how the region currently is with its agencies, and then the recent development of the Regional Transportation Commission. Could you speak a little bit about the commission and then the gap that you feel the commission is really in a position to fill?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Let me extend greetings to some of our study commissioners. I hope I be able to recognize all of you. Dave Kaufman, are you here? I think you are. Doug Conkey, Danny Leeper. Any others? Study commissioners? I can't even see who's there, but hey, Jack. Who else is here? Hey, Steve. Well, good morning, and thank you, everybody. And to Brad Thoburn, who was from JTA, who is the project manager for our 2-year study commission adventure. The fundamental question that we faced as a commission when we started working in 2010 was whether a new regional organization was needed in Northeast Florida to develop, to fund, to implement a multimodal regional transportation plan that would provide and promote regionally significant transportation services and facilities. And as Jeff alluded to, we actually attack this problem by performing a gap analysis. Many of you have done this. We identified existing agencies that are providing regional services, and we flagged those services that are not being addressed today. And we concluded that there's no existing organization that can or could perform the comprehensive regional transportation functions we believe our region merits. Our TPO, headed by Mr. Sheffield, does a great job planning and setting priorities for spending federal dollars in our region. But it's a four-county boundary, and its board makeup is governed by federal law. Its membership of elected officials is subject to regular turnover. And it can't develop or advocate in a manner the study commission concluded that we needed. Our regional council, Northeast Florida Regional Council, produces a strategic regional policy plan, and it includes transportation and land use policies. But like the TPO, its funding, its implementation, and its advocacy powers are limited. Consequently, the study commission concluded, and the legislature agreed, that a new organization, the Northeast Florida Regional Transportation Commission, should be created, and this is the mission statement in the legislation, and I'm quoting, to improve mobility and expand multimodal transportation options for persons and freight throughout the six-county North Florida region. The commission will be comprised of 9 members. It'll serve Baker, Clay, Duval, Nassau, Putnam, and St. Johns counties. Duval County will have 4 members, 2 members each appointed by the Jacksonville mayor, the Jacksonville City Council. The other member county governing boards will appoint 1 each. 1 member each. Initial funding will be per capita contributions based on population. The Transportation Commission will develop a multimodal transportation plan and secure funding sources for this plan's initial phases. If 4 of the 6 member counties do not endorse the plan and the funding sources within 5 years, the commission will sunset. Here's an overview.
Thank you, Bob. We'll get into some more detail with that. Daniel, we'll move on to you. The Regional Commission itself was looked at as an opportunity to complement and supplement the public entities that Bob had mentioned, just to bring a broader perspective on that. More newly developed at this point is the Regional Business Alliance for Advancing Transportation, so new that it only has a chairman at this point, Moody Chisholm, CEO with St. Vincent's, and we're looking at developing it. But the context of what that alliance is the business community. That's another piece that Secretary Prasad had mentioned, just getting more consensus. I want to get your take on that in terms of your perspective on the business community as a group as it relates to transportation. Is there a gap there, and do you see this fulfilling some of that opportunity?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. And first of all, I'm very grateful to be up here on this panel with Bob Rhodes. And as Chairman of Transportation, I've had the opportunity to work with Secretary Prasad, and he's a gem, and we need to all be thankful for his service to our state. I've served on the Jacksonville City Council for a while, and we, as council members or commissioners and people that are very close to the community, often get phone calls and complaints about traffic. And I had this one individual who just about every week would call me while he was in traffic and to let me know that he was sitting in traffic. And I had his phone number dialed into my phone, and halfway through the year, I continued to receive phone calls. And then one day I received a phone call, and I knew it was him and what was fixing to come. And I answered the phone, and it was kind of, I was a little bit put out and said, hello. And he said, Councilman Davis. I said, yes, sir. How are you doing today? He said, I want to tell you something. He goes, I am sitting in traffic in Atlanta, and Jacksonville has no traffic problem. we've got a lot in this community to be grateful for. We just returned from a leadership trip the Chamber did this last couple weeks. We had 140 members from this region go to Charlotte, and we heard a lot of great things about how Charlotte had been successful. And every time I was up there, I'm very competitive, and I was always thinking, well, Jacksonville can do better than you in this one. And, you know, they would have 3 of their best people talk, and I would think about all the 3 people I would pick in Jacksonville to say the same thing about us. And one thing that they had that I think was a difference maker for some of their success downtown and some of their trade was they had a business community that came up with a plan, and once they came up with the plan and the winds blew in different directions, they were on track. They were even keel. No matter which way the wind blew, the business community was responsible for carrying that plan out. And coming back, the excitement from the folks, and there's several people in this room that went on the trip, about our business community, the economy starting to turn. I think that there's an opportunity for us in this moment in time. And it's an opportunity for us to prove to the community that we're serious about improving our region. I think that takes everybody from all the local counties and municipalities and organizations and the state to do it. And I think that we can do it. I'm very, very excited about the next several years and what we can offer. You know, honestly, there is not another community anywhere around our region that has the natural resources, the distribution infrastructure that we have in our port. I believe our number one issue should make sure in the business community would be to make sure we get to deep water at our port. And do not stop as a business community to make that happen. I think that this business alliance that we are putting together will be part of that understanding of how we can make Jacksonville the logistics and Northeast Florida the logistics hub of the United States of America. We have too many things going for us, and we as a business community should be the ones that lead the way. I'm very excited about this opportunity, and like I said when I started out, just honored to be up on this stage with these fine gentlemen.
Thank you. Any questions out there yet? If not, we'll keep the conversation going more open. We do have one right in the back. Olga.
I'm not sure this is the right time, but I'm going to ask it anyway. One of my concerns in Florida is, unlike the other states on the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, we have 14 deep water ports competing for the resources that we have here in Florida, and the other states have 2, whatever. How do we move through and do the necessary things and make the proper investments in the ports that we need to do that'll allow some ports to move forward and get the deep water and so forth that we need without hurting the other ports? We compete, obviously, in Jacksonville with 13 other ports in Florida, and Savannah and Brunswick and so forth. So how do we move forward without watering down the resources that we'll have available in Florida to do the port improvements we need?
Oh, that's a great question. We actually have 15 deep water seaports. The 15th one, I'm not sure I'm going to drown in it, but it is deep waters technically. That's one of the first things, based on building on the trade logistics study the Chamber did, is that we initiated, and Chairman Davis here, the Transportation Committee supported, is to create a strategic seaport initiative. And the whole purpose of the Seaport Investment Plan is the same thing, is for the state of Florida to strategically invest resources in ports to gain market share. When I meet with the 15 deep water ports folks, I say our competition, not Tampa or Everglades or Miami, our competition for Jacksonville is Savannah or Mobile. We need to be competing against other states, not amongst ourselves. So the strategic seaport initiatives really helped us in making sure that we make those kind of investments. Since Governor Scott took office, we have our investment in seaports gone up 400%. This year alone, $300 million is going into seaport investment. And the strategic seaport is what's going to lead to Jacksonville. The Port of Miami dredge project was funded through that. So we're looking for the main big game changer kind of projects that would dramatically increase our market share and increase trade and exports. And so you're exactly on, and we recognize that, but we have the resources, we have the mechanisms to do it. What we need is everybody to come together and support the project at a local level. And you know, we're going to talk about Jacksport, I'm sure, here pretty soon. It needs the support. It's a very important project. Jacksport deepening needs to happen, but it needs a lot of support, and not sure everybody's on board yet.
I would like to say, and a big kudos to Governor Scott. He puts his money where his mouth is, and he's focusing on creating jobs, and I've seen it firsthand. And I can tell you that thanks to several of your representatives from the Northeast Florida region, we have been very successful in bringing those infrastructure port dollars back to Northeast Florida, especially Representative Lake Ray, who has become one of the logistics experts in Tallahassee. So I think we are seeing success, even though there are so many ports. You would have been, I think, appreciative and thought that your representatives did a great job bringing that money back to Northeast Florida.
One other point I want to make is, you know, we're on the eve of a federal, or not on the eve, on the morning of a federal government shutdown. The state of Florida actually has invested over $120 million of its own money that is otherwise owed by federal government. Mile Point Fix in Jacksonville is about $30 million. We got tired of waiting for federal government, and Governor Scott said, we're going to fund that, because we don't want federal government to kind of pick winners and losers. We got a port here, we have the resources, so we not only funded the Mile Point Fix, but the Port of Miami. The federal government owes us about $77.5 million for that project. They're still trying to balance their budget up there. State of Florida has a balanced budget, thanks to leadership of governor and the legislature. We had a surplus last year. We're going to have a surplus this year. So we were able to fund the federal share with state dollars and not wait for federal government to decide, so that we can have at least one port 50 feet, dredged to 50 feet in time for the post-Panamax vessels when they go through Panama Canal. So those are kind of the things that we're already working on, and being aggressive and not let others dictate the destiny for us, especially the federal government.
Bob?
Yeah. Well, we clearly have to partner with the Secretary in Tallahassee, but let's remember, and let's compliment what Daniel's been working on. We have a regional freight and logistics objective in our strategic regional economic development plan. Innovate Northeast Florida's plan. It's very important. We need to implement that plan. We need to pour that plan into the Regional Transportation Commission's plan and get it off the ground. We have to convince the Secretary that we can make it happen. We're going to be a priority, and I hope that that can be one of the immediate priorities of the Transportation Commission.
I was going to save this one for later, but we're talking about the funding, and we're talking about how we move. As Ananth had mentioned, the state stepped up and funded opportunities the feds were not able to do. By that same token, the region still needs to step up and possibly fund opportunities that the state simply can't manage all of our needs that are in the area. You've seen this trend now across the country with some states and regions advancing referendums in the area of potential transportation taxes and assessments, and opportunities like that potentially will present themselves here someday to need to take care of some of our own needs. I'm curious your own perspectives and opinions on that, in terms of what do you think it would take here if we were in that position to gain the voter support for some kind of initiative or referendum like that to advance our own regional needs?
Well, historically, the voters in Northeast Florida have always voted in the right direction on issues like this. I think they get it, and I think we get it as a community. I think it's pretty clear, too, that it has to be a community-up campaign if we were ever to try to sell something to the community as to how we can move forward with our economy and focus on the logistics improvements that we need. It cannot be a top-down discussion. So I would not be surprised if that's not in the near future. And I once again believe that the business community and the community as a whole should be the ones that bring it to the public. And I think we would be successful because I think we've got a good story to tell.
Bob?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Daniel. I mean, let's face it, conceptually and in the abstract, we don't like taxes, we don't like new fees. But as we looked at this issue in the study commission, and we looked at the experience that we've had here in Jacksonville, Duval County and the Better Jacksonville Plan, why was it successful? We looked at and tried to learn, actually, at other referendums all over the United States that were successful and unsuccessful. And, you know, we concluded that the public is more likely to support a new revenue source by referendum if it believes there'll be a good return on the investment of public dollars. And that's going to be the challenge of the Transportation Commission, to put together a plan and a message, working with the Business Alliance, take it to the local government bodies that have to endorse the plan and the revenue sources, and then ultimately to the public.
Jeff, and I think I echo what both gentlemen said, but I think one thing, and being been in government majority of my career, is we also as government need to think, are we doing things that are still relevant? Before we ask our taxpayers to pay more taxes and fees, you know, governor asked all the agency at one time and says, you guys, you need to look at yourself and see, quit doing things that are irrelevant. You know, and, you know, we used to have a thing that we've always done it that way. You know, DOT, you know, started in 60s, 70s, it's the same model, and we're in 21st century. So I think before we start asking the taxpayers to pay more, and I think if you sell it the right way, I think you gain support, but as government, we also need to kind of revisit and say, are we doing the things we need to keep doing? Because by not doing those things that are irrelevant, you're going to gain capacity within the existing revenue sources to pay for it. And that's what people look at. I think people generally look at it says, has government done all it could before asking for more? And I'm not so sure we in government ever make that case really well.
Right. Along those same lines, we'll stick with that for one more question, and that is the subject of tolls. They are back in Northeast Florida in the First Coast Outer Beltway, and the future of managed lane facilities along 295, all critical projects that frankly couldn't happen without that. But my question is in context of tolls, do you see that in the foreseeable future as still an issue that needs to be considered in all funding opportunities as we go forward, whether it's in the context of the regional commission or from a state perspective? Do you foresee tolls being part of that solution?
So I'm going to play a reverse logic here. Tolls is generally not a very popular topic in Jacksonville and Duval County, I get that. But how many of you want Jacksport to be deepened? Great support. You know what the price tag is? $600 million, 60% of federal share, so $360 million comes from federal government, hopefully, they're still open and have money. And 240 would have to come from local. So typically it's a 50-50 share, so 120 million will come from state, 120 million comes from local. That's one. All right, so how many of you would like some sort of transit, light rail, commuter rail around the Northeast Florida? You know, this commission's going to, how many of you would like to see that? Well, I see some hands here, so there's some support to that. Guess where all this money is going to come from? How does transit gets paid? Does anybody know how transit gets paid? Taxation. Well, it comes from gas tax. Okay, news for you. Fare box recovery on transit's about 20 to 30%, and most of transit comes from gas tax. The federal transit account is a subset of the Highway Trust Fund. So it's important. So having said that stage, you saw Saddle Creek trucks going on CNG and LPG and all of that good stuff. We got fuel efficient cars. Cars are going to give you 35, 40 miles per gallon. Got a news flash for you. Federal government highway trust fund is already broke. It's running out of money this year unless the federal government actually moves money from the general reserve fund, general fund, to the highway trust fund. That's the reason why tolls are such important, because if we want to invest in things like Jacksport and transit projects that local community wants, then the backdrop of those investments are going to come from a trust fund that is bleeding right now. And so with the demand of highways already there, and with our new demands on intermodalism, port investments, airport investments, it's all the more important that we diversify. You can't toll every road, and you shouldn't toll every road. So that's why we have been very aggressive on express lanes and managed lanes concepts on interstate, because it does two things. It provides choices. You would still be able to take 295 when managed lanes are in and not pay 1 penny more to use 295. But you will have a choice for you. It's no different than if you're mailing a letter, you go to the U.S. Postal Service and drop the letter off. If you're trying to get a visa to Brazil or getting your passport renewed, more than likely you're going to go to FedEx and UPS. So you make those value choices of what you want to do. What managed lanes provides is a value choice. I drove down this morning from Tallahassee, left early, said, you know what, just in case, and we don't have traffic problems like Atlanta does. Yeah, we had congestion through downtown here and a lot of construction projects, but what managed lanes would allow you to do is provide you a choice that if you are running late, you can make the time value decision, pay an extra toll, and get to this meeting on time without having to leave half an hour or 45 minutes earlier than what you should do. So keep that in context, that tolls is another way to diversify a revenue source that is running dry. And if we want to make investments in our ports, and if I want to make investment in transit and those kind of things, all the more important that we need to continue to diversify the revenue source.
I don't think Daniel wants to talk about that.
Yeah, I know.
Let me say that the Transportation Commission's plan is going to be developed. Revenue sources to fund the Transportation Commission plan are going to be developed concurrent with the plan. And so it's going to be a choice. The choice for the commission is how you're going to fund what you want to do. The state legislation that created the commission does not preclude tolls. As far as I can see, they're on the table. They're going to be an option. I expect they're going to be considered.
A little softer now. Well, we hear Ananth mention transit, and I'm curious, when we look at the regional discussion, so much of it centers around large infrastructure projects, highway, port deepening, and opportunities like that. But I'm curious from all three of you anyway, your perspectives on how important you think regional transit and the advancement of other modes of transportation are, both in the network, but also in terms of economic development opportunities for the region.
In theory, I enjoy talking about it. But most of the time, we've talked about it, and people in town hall meetings have looked at studies so you could ride the mass transit and they could get to work faster in their car. And I have to tell you, personally, I think that we should focus on specific things, not be distracted by other transportation issues, and as a community say these are our priorities, and let's not do anything else until we complete these priorities. That would be what my suggestion should be to the business community and hopefully to the community that is deciding these next steps.
When we did our gap analysis in the study commission, one of the major gaps that we identified was the lack of regional transit. And the Transportation Commission plan will have an element dealing with regional transit. Our recommendation from the Study Commission to the Commission is that regional transit with the Commission as a coordinator working with local transit agencies and with local planning departments should be an immediate priority. There's a need there. We fully expect that the Transportation Commission will tackle it, and so I think it's going to be right on the front burner.
I think both points are exactly, I think you're going to have a menu of priorities that's going to far outstretch what your capability of revenue generation is going to be. That's going to be the reality, okay? And so you're going to have to make tough choices, and that's unfortunately what happens. I give you a couple examples. You know, we're building our second commuter rail in Orlando, and it's going to be running next year. The state's going to operate it for 7 years, and right now the local governments are struggling in how to come up with the resources to operate beyond year 7. Now, there's a backstop mechanism that will protect the system, so we made sure that, you know, 7 years later that we don't have a way. But some of these things on an annual O&M basis, what the federal government does and what the state government does is invest in capital dollars, which is what we did on Sunrail. Look at Tri-Rail. The state of Florida continues to subsidize Tri-Rail to the tune of $60 million. All of you in this room pay for the Tri-Rail that's running, and probably most of you have never ridden on it. And the local governments are only contributing $2 million, $3 million a year. The 3 counties, the 3 biggest counties that got a lot of money, believe in transit. So at the end of the day, all of those, I think you got to be honest to yourself. And I think, like Representative Davis mentioned, there's going to be choices. You're going to have to make tough choices, and what's important for you. As a state, we will be there. We're going to be there to invest in capital dollars. But the big issue on transit is the yearly O&M costs. And those things, if you don't plan for it, it's a movie that's you're going to have to go see it and live through with it. So I think what the commission's going to do, I think, is a good effort. We definitely got on board with the concept of it. It's trying to tackle those issues because it needs to be tackled. But we have a lot of this mentality, unfortunately, in our country, is that everybody wants a lot of things, but nobody wants to pay for it. And I've been still waiting for that free iPhone deal that I could get, and I still can't find it. And I just read the Wall Street Journal article today that iPhone 5S only costs about $140 for Apple to make, but you know how much you pay. If you buy it unlocked, it's $600. So if we want something, then we're going to have to step up and be willing to pay for it. And that's the dynamic that we haven't figured out how to solve yet.
Daniel?
There's always a place for mass transit. I want to be really clear with that. But I read a book about 5 years ago on leadership, and the principles in the book have held true. And it's very simple. Take your strengths and make them stronger. Understand and admit your weaknesses and put people around you that can help you manage through that. Don't try to make your weaknesses your strengths. The same principle applies to business, to communities, and I believe to the Northeast Florida region. It is very, very clear that our strength in Northeast Florida is logistics. If we want to rise the tide that will lift all the boats, no pun intended, we have to focus on our strength. And when we get into these priorities with limited resources, we have to, as a community, look at what we can do to make the biggest impact for all the businesses, for all the quality of life that we want to see, the improvements in quality of life that we'd like to see. So I think it's clear that we need to focus on our strength. And with the infrastructure we have with Cecil, with the port, and with the interstate system, that is something we should focus on and make sure that we improve.
Bob?
Just one final comment. I agree with Daniel, but logistics centers have to be connected to jobs. Connection, connection, connection. And at least from the study commission point of view, we feel that regional transit is a major component of that connection.
Question?
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm just wondering on your view regarding public and private partnerships and infrastructure investment.
We're very supportive of public-private partnership, but there's also this myth about public-private partnership is let's not government go build it, and let's have private firms come build the stuff. I'll give you in context. As you know, we're building First Coast Expressway, the outer beltway around Jacksonville, and some people have suggested to the department, and to me, it says, why are you even building it? Why don't we do a public-private partnership? Well, guess what? When you do a public-private partnership, there still be a toll. Private sector is not going to invest billions of dollars for charitable purposes. If you find that, I've been talking to Bank of America, and they're not willing to give us $1 billion to build a road and not to give them a return on that investment. So at the end of the day, public-private partnerships have a role. I was talking to the Jacksport, Brian, just this morning about that we ought to look for some opportunities at the port. There's interest here. Let's try to, we still, from a public perspective, public stewardship standpoint, the government, the local, state will continue to have a role in it. But we ought to create a climate in the region to attract private equity. Because if not for that, we would not be able to do some of the things we're doing. Panama Canal's been talked about in the presentation, truly remarkable. All the 4 ports in Panama are private ports. How many ports do we have in the country, U.S., that are private? I don't know the number. I think it's 0. Panama, is eating our lunch. So the key thing, I'm not suggesting here that we need to privatize port, because I'm not sure that's where we want. Panama has distinct advantages and why they did what they did. But I think we need to create a climate where if somebody wants to come and operate a terminal for a long-term period, make sure you have your public policy safeguards in place, structures in a way that not only they grow, but then you get more equity into the port, so the port can then continually make investment. And so we got to continue to create that culture. And what I tell folks in the department is somebody comes up and says, I want to build you a road, you know what? You should just be so open about it. At the end of the day, it probably may not make sense to do it, but we ought to always create a climate where we are very, very open and welcoming for private equity to be brought into the state, because that's what's going to take in delivering some of these huge projects.
I have a question related to your comments earlier, Daniel, just now about logistics and the opportunities and the need to advance the region. We heard, of course, from the Florida Logistics Study, obviously the state views it in that capacity on a national level, but there's no denying Northeast Florida and where we're positioned in terms of the gateway. So sharing that notion, though, and continuing to push the issue, like you mentioned, how can we better demonstrate that to our state and federal leaders as we keep pushing Northeast Florida as that gateway for logistics?
Well, first of all, we need to convince our community. And I don't know if I think everybody in this room understands, but I don't know if everybody in our region understands the importance of logistics. And I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to spread that word. And we talk about exporting, and that was a great presentation, Doug. I had the opportunity in my first 90 days of being at the chamber to visit several different businesses in the community, and I was shocked at how many folks in our community are exporting. And it was very encouraging. And so we have to get that message out there. And I think that's part of our role as a chamber, to make sure we communicate that with the community. Once we convince the community and build up trust, and they believe that we will actually do what we say we're going to do, then I think it's a snowball rolling down the hill with the rest of it.
Jeff, and I tell you, the trade logistic for Jackson was a huge potential. First, you just think about so many advantages. First, you got land. There's no reason why Jacksonville to around the surrounding counties, all the way to Columbia County, could be any different than Savannah to Atlanta corridor. If you've driven that interstate, it is one warehouse after one warehouse along that interstate, and there's really no reason why that can't be. Miami makes sense for the first investment because, as Doug mentioned, we consume a lot and we need to get stuff imported into it. But last time I checked, it's a while before you cross the Florida-Georgia border if you leave Miami. You're within a year shot of crossing the Florida-Georgia. You can, I don't know the exact stat, I'm sure the port guys can tell you, within 6 hours you can reach about 50 million people. Instantaneously. Just think about the advantage. So you have not only the Cecil Commerce Center, you got the port, you got the airport, you have infrastructure that ties in without having bottlenecks. You really are sitting on a great potential, and it's very, I couldn't said it any better. We've got to rally around and make sure everybody understand that, because once you do that, it's going to create organically enough revenues to do all the other things that we need to do.
Any comment? Any questions? Any more? Yes, sir, in the back.
Sure. How do we reconcile what you're saying with, like, we have the governor talking about budget surplus not going to this kind of infrastructure? Representative Davis, you advocated for a moratorium on the mobility fee before the city council. How do you reconcile these things with the need for investment in this infrastructure that you're talking about?
Well, I think that was geared towards me. You know, in the global economic meltdown, we had to focus on triage because there were folks that were just trying to put food on the table. And in cases like that, you saw county after county reduce or eliminate impact fees for a temporary amount of time just to allow hardworking people to feed their kids. So when you see us coming out of the valley and you're starting to see the light, I think it's time for us to invest back into our community because I think we can handle it at this point. So that's how I reconcile those two situations. And that's what your elected leaders are for, to bring some reason and some outside-the-box thinking whenever you have folks that have to, in government, have to follow black and white rules. So hopefully we made the right decisions, and I believe we did.
And Jeff, and I would look at transportation as no different than, transportation portfolio is no different than an investment portfolio. You know, I'm still about 20, 25 years from retirement, you gotta, if you invest money, you gotta gain 6, 8% return on that investment. If you keep putting money in CDs, well, you know what? You ain't gonna be retiring for 20, 25 years. So you gotta seek the balance and diversity in the portfolio. And I think that's what Representative Day's talking about is to make sure all of those are important. But we need to make sure the governor's been very supportive. We've actually built a project that has very low return on investment. That's hard coming from a guy who just really beats me every day, says, show me the return on investment. But we can make those investments because we are investing in other projects that are giving that good return on investment. So it's seeking that balance. If you just invest in projects that doesn't give you any return, well, then fees are going to go up and taxes are going to go up, and that's the strategy that doesn't work. Hasn't worked in D.C. And it doesn't work anywhere. So so I think play to your strengths, grow your economy. The governor throws this stat out. If we Floridian on average pays about $3,000 in taxes. So if you create 300,000 jobs, you got yourself another $1 billion. Last year, about 250,000 people moved to our state. We're going to be the third biggest state in the country. You move another 300,000 people from the freezing tundra up there, get them here, get them gainfully employed, and they pay $3,000. You got yourself $2 billion. You know what? We can invest in education. We can invest in infrastructure. We can do a lot of good things. So at the end of the day is the magic here is get jobs. When people are gainfully employed, they pay the existing taxes, they go out and spend their money, and it generates enough revenue for us to make those investments.
Can we call up the video? I think in closing here, I think this is an opportunity really just if you have a few minutes to watch this. As it relates to, we hear the comments about needing to create a regional vision. One of the things that the North Florida TPO is required to do is develop a long-range transportation plan. As you heard though from Bob, there are some challenges as it relates to the TPO in our boundary compared to the commission, but we're trying to move forward in partnership with that commission in developing it. We are in the process now of developing that plan, and we have a few-minute video just to share with you, and that'll conclude the event for it.
North Florida, like many great regions, began as a hub for commerce and transportation. Our region includes some of our nation's first ports, cities, and roads. This transportation system shaped our past and will drive our future. Roads, bridges, airports, railroads, and seaports help deliver the goods we consume each day. About 100 million tons of freight are transported through the region by truck, rail, air, and water each year. These activities are a major engine driving our economy. However, our future as America's logistics center is in danger because of traffic congestion. Traffic congestion slows the movement of people and goods that make this region vital and prosperous. Every day we travel to work, to school, for shopping and recreation. And our population is growing. By the year 2040, we'll have nearly 2 million residents. Not only will we have more demand for transportation, but the mobility needs of our residents will change too. For many, access to transit and the ability to walk to work or shop may be more important than driving. Increasing gas prices and concerns about air quality are also changing the way we travel. Cycling has become more popular for personal transportation as well as recreation. Together, as a region, whether you are from St. Augustine, Fernandina, Palatka, McClenny, Green Cove Springs, or Jacksonville, we must act boldly to define the transportation investments that will shape our community's future for decades to come. We often take it for granted, but building roads, transit, and other transportation infrastructure doesn't happen overnight. It takes years of planning and coordination, and these investments must meet the challenges of today's congestion and tomorrow's growth and changing demographics. For example, by the year 2040, 20% of our nation's population will be over age 65. We must evaluate these needs and trends and choose the path forward to invest in our future. So, how do we decide which investments are best for shaping our region? To make these choices, we need to ask, how can we make our current transportation system more efficient and smart? What can we do to better connect people, jobs, and communities? How will we provide transportation for our aging population? Which transportation improvements will address congestion and improve air quality? How can we plan for less financial support from state and federal governments? The North Florida Transportation Planning Organization, or TPO, is developing the Path Forward 2040 Long-Range Transportation Plan. The TPO is the independent transportation planning agency for our region. We plan, fund, and mobilize resources needed to develop and maintain our transportation system. To create the plan, we'll collaborate with partner agencies, businesses, and community stakeholders and the public to identify our transportation needs, forecast funding available, and prioritize the most significant projects that can be funded, because our needs are greater than the funding available. Your input is essential in creating this plan. Join us as we strive to forge a path that's livable, sustainable, safe, convenient, efficient, smart, and green. A path that meets your needs. Visit our website, pathforward2040.com, to learn how you can participate in shaping the future of transportation in our region.
Shameless plug there, but I think the message itself speaks to what we're talking about. I want to thank Daniel, Ananth, and Bob for this morning. I think it was very informative. I hope you found it informative as well. And certainly if there are additional questions later, I think some of them may still be here to answer those. But I appreciate it.